Welcome everyone to again a webinar presented to you by the Sound Control Consortium. And today on your request, so there were many requests from people within our consortium to have a webinar on the implication of the new animal health law. So today Maria Guelbenzu, who is working at Animal Health Ireland in Ireland, is going to share some information on the new animal health law and its implication for list C, D and E diseases, where she will focus on the diseases bovine viral diarrhea and IBR. So some technical notes. Well, you can keep your cameras on. So here, this is an old notice, but I guess what we learned over time is that the connection is really stable. So please keep your cameras on so that we can that we have the idea that we are presenting to people and not to a black hole. But please set your microphones on mute. So if you have a comment or questions, please raise your hand, or what you can also do is during the presentation, enter your comments in the chat. So when you would want to ask a question in person, unmute your microphone and turn on your camera, and we will give you the word. The floor. So this webinar will be recorded and will be published on our website later on, so that people can look back and see the webinar and get the information for themselves. So without further ado, I will stop to share my presentation, and I will give the floor to our presenter of today. That is Maria. Maria.
Thanks very much, Inke. Let me see if I can just start sharing my screen. And just say while I'm doing this that I'm a vet, so I'm not a specialist in animal health law, however, or in law. But over the last couple of years, we've really had to go through these new animal health regulations to see how our programs in Ireland could fit in or not fit in. So I'm just going to give you our experience of this. And what I would like to do is first go through some basics about the animal health law and to talk about the disease classification, because this has been also a topic, as you probably know, or at least once of you have been involved in sound control, that has been important for this cost action. And then I would like to go through the details of the new annex for BVD and the annex for IBR and tell you how we are approaching it in Ireland kind of align our programs. So why was there a need to have a new animal health law? And initially, first of all the legislation in animal health diseases was really scattered through a high number of different legal acts. So the
sorry, Maria, sorry, there's already some sound problem.
Okay.
Can you come a bit closer?
Yeah, well, actually, I'm supposed to have this microphone, so it's a bit weird why it's not working. But please, yeah, let me know. I'll try to put it a bit closer.
Yeah, now it's really good. When you're close to your mic, it's really good to sound.
Perfect. I'll try to keep it there. So it started really with the development of the EU Animal Health Strategy 2019 to 13, where the main aim was that prevention is better than cure. So this was a kind of a new approach, and this animal health strategy did this through different strains. One was defining priorities, so really developing profilings and categorization of animal disease risks. So with the idea that understanding these risks, you could really control and reduce the impact of outbreaks, and also the control the incidence of potential diseases. And then another aim that he had was really to have a new animal health framework where rules would be simplified, and then again the focus on prevention, on surveillance and preparedness, and underpinned by science, innovation and research. So this the animal health law really, the main regulation is this one, is 2016 429, which is applicable since the 21st of April 21. And the aim is to prevent and control animal diseases that can be transmitted either to other animals or to humans. So there is a certain aspect of One Health in these regulations. So as I mentioned before, is trimming the high number of legal acts in a single law, with the aim to have simpler, clearer rules. And an important new point is that the responsibilities are clarified, not only for vets, but also for animal keepers, and not only for livestock keepers, also for pet keepers. And there is a more risk-based approach, more prevention, and biosecurity features very strongly in these new regulations, but of course other aspects like surveillance, vaccines, etc. The new list of diseases is also key, and this was developed by the European Food Safety Authority and also underpinned by the World Organization of Animal Health, especially for their manuals. And what does this animal health include? It includes requirements for disease prevention, awareness, surveillance, control and eradication, biosecurity, as I mentioned. Now it features very strongly traceability of animal and animal products, and movement of animals and animal products, and emergency measures. And just a quick note on what it does not include, which are rules of animal welfare, veterinary expenditure, authorization of use of medicines or medicated feed, veterinary education, and official controls. Of course, these are governed by other pieces of legislation. And this is the animal health framework. So we do have these main regulations. Let me see if I can get the list. Which is the regulation 2016-429, but this is and has different parts, but these ones are also supported by other pieces of regulations or implemented regulations or delegated regulations. So the first part has just the general rules. The second part is the part that has rules of disease notification, reporting, surveillance, eradication programs. This is where the focus of today really is going to be, because that's where we have the rules, certainly for BVD and IBR. Then the part 3 is to do with disease awareness, preparedness, and control. Part 4 is to do with registration, approval, traceability, and movements, and is divided into 2 here, because one part is for terrestrial animals and another one is part 2 is for aquatic animals. And part 5 deals with entry into the EU. So you know, let's have a look as well and see what kind of species are we talking about, what kind of animals. So he's talking certainly about livestock, and we know that in 2019 in the EU there were 77 million bovine animals, 143 million pigs, 74 million sheep and goats, and 1.6 billion poultry. But the animal health law also involves certainly aquatic animals, which also feature quite heavily in terms of farmed fish, equines, and many others, including pets. In fact, all animals that are able to either transmit or be a vector to any of the listed diseases, then they are covered by the animal health law. And let's have a quick look also about the responsibilities. So we have responsibilities now for animal keepers, and these involve having a knowledge of the health of their animals, having also prudent use of veterinary medicines, minimizing the risk of spreading diseases. They have responsibility in good animal husbandry and also biosecurity. And biosecurity involves many aspects. Some of it are physical, so the animals are well fenced or roofed, but then also that they have procedures for the introduction of animals, of people, and importantly, things like quarantine places where not only sick animals, but also introduced animals can be placed. So again, it's expanding responsibilities quite a bit. In terms of vets, now the vets must have an active role in raising animal health awareness, and also importantly, raising awareness on resistance to treatments. And this is again important because the whole antimicrobial resistance issue, which is again featuring in these regulations. And of course, in disease prevention and early detection, is including responsibility is in being aware of the different diseases. So let's have a look at the list of diseases and their implications. Now, diseases are categorized in 5 different categories. So category A diseases are diseases that do not normally occur in the Union and for which immediate eradication measures must be taken as soon as is detected. So some examples of these are foot and mouth disease, classic and swine fever, African swine fever, and highly pathogenic avian influenza. Category B are listed diseases that must be controlled in all member states with the goal of eradicating it throughout the Union. So it's compulsory to have a control and eradication program for these diseases. And examples are Brucellosis, abortus, Brucella melitensis, and suis, and the Mycobacterium tuberculosis complex. Category C, and now we're getting to the types of diseases that we're more interested especially in the sound control action, are listed diseases of relevance to some member states for which measures are needed to prevent it from spreading to parts of the Union that are officially disease-free or that have eradication programs. Examples of these are Echinococcus multilocularis, Luton virus, IBR, BVD, and EBL. Now, I've highlighted some of these. And this is because BVD is the first time that there are some rules in the legislation in the European Union. So it's the first time that appears. And in the case of EBL and Luton virus, they have changed from diseases that was compulsory to have a control and eradication program to Cat C diseases. Category D then are listed diseases for which measures are needed to prevent them from spreading on account of its entry to the Union or movements between member states. And these are anthrax, Ebola, trichomoniasis, or low pathogenic influenza. And finally, category E are listed diseases for which there is a need of surveillance within the Union. And examples of these are paratuberculosis, West Nile fever, and Q fever. Again, this is not an exhaustive list, just some examples. And I'm going to show you again an example of the disease list. And you can see that, well, we do have obviously the name, but the category, which a lot of them have in more than one category. And then the species and group of the species that these diseases can transmit these diseases, and also vector species. And just to say that there are some rules, for example, the responsibility that apply to all animals and species, regardless of the disease. But then there are some disease-specific rules that apply only to listed diseases. So coming now into, this is the regulation that we're going to be looking now, which is the rules for surveillance and eradication programs, etc. And just to briefly mention, it's got some general provisions. So talk about the scope, population, period of application. So typically when you have a recognized EU program, you have 6 years to obtain or to claim the freedom. Now, this might be also you might look for extension, but it's something to bear in mind because we know that some of these diseases might take a bit longer to remove. And then of interest are Annex 3, which talk about the diagnostic methods that can be applied, and Annex 5, which talk about the disease-specific requirements for granting, maintenance, suspension, and withdrawal. And this is both for the level of establishment or of maintenance. So let's have a look at the detail. First of all, let's talk a bit about BVD. So we know that there are many different types of programs. This is a map from this paper, which is an output from our sound control cost action, and reflects the situation of the control programs for BVD in Europe. What we can see is some countries are perceived free, and this is because before 2021, there was no way of having an official free status for BVD. But then we also see that a lot of countries have control plans. There's a variety of options, and really just briefly, just to talk about what occurs beside the animal health law or before the animal health law. We have typically two types of programs for BVD in Europe, and one follows the Scandinavian model that started in the 1990s with the appearance of the new ELISAs, and is based on herd level testing and antibody testing that first classify the herds between infected and not infected, and then they're used for monitoring the herd. An important point for this is that the vaccination is forbidden in these countries, and therefore the use of antibody test is much easier. Through this model, the Nordic countries and Austria and Shetland Islands have been able to be free, and this is a model also applied in other countries. The Swiss model that started in 2004, again with the developments of the new diagnostic techniques, PCRs and tissue testing, is based on animal level testing. And what they did was test all the cattle in Switzerland initially, followed by calves, although they have introduced a later use of serology. But this use of animal level testing for BVD virus is used in Germany, in Ireland, in Belgium, in Northern Ireland, and more importantly, there are countries where there is a mixed approach, perhaps using serology first and then animal level testing insert. So this is just to give an idea of the variety of approaches. So let's see now what the actual annex says. There are certain requirements for an establishment to be free of BVD. The first one is that during the previous 18 months, there's been no confirmed case of BVD in the establishment. The second is that there is a testing regime, and we're going to look at this in the next slide. Also, that since the beginning of the sampling, there are rules applied to the introduction of animals, and we'll look at them separately. And then finally, that the germinal products that are being used in this establishment are either from BVD-free establishment or from approved germinal product establishments. So in terms of the testing, there are really three main options. The first one is that all animals are tested for virus, including all calves in the previous last months. So this one fits quite well to what Ireland is doing at the moment. And the second one is that at least 3 serological screening tests are carried out, and these have to target 50% seroprevalence with 95% confidence and a minimum of 5 animals. Or you could use a combination of the two, and with the capacity to detect the disease that is equivalent to any of the other 2 regimes. In terms of introduction of animals, well, if they're coming from a free establishment in a free zone, they can come in with no problem. If it's a BVD-free establishment that is not in a BVD-free zone, the establishment has to have a negative serological test as prescribed by the animal health law in the past 4 months, or tested prior to dispatch to exclude BVD transmission, and this is taking into account the age of the animal, pregnancy status, etc. So then the animals can come in. And if the herd is the establishment is not free, then the animals have to be tested negative for antigen or genome, and they need a pre-dispatch 21-day quarantine. And if they're pregnant, they either have to be negative for antibodies after at least 21 days of quarantine, or having been positive for BVD antibodies prior to dispatch or before the insemination, preceding the current gestation. So these are obviously targeting the movement of Trojan animals. In terms of maintaining the status, well, they have to, of course, continue to comply with no confirmed cases and introduce animals, and also the rules on germinal products. Also that no animal has been vaccinated against BVD. Also that one testing regime is carried out, and we'll look at them in the next slide. And that if this free establishment is in a member state or zone free from BVD, only non-vaccinated animals are introduced. So you can see that the rules for introduction of animals are tight. In terms of the testing requirements, again, we either test the newborn calves no later than 20 days postpartum. It can be reduced now to at least one annual serological screening test, again with the same target, 50% prevalence with 95% confidence, or a combination of the two. In terms to member state, there are three main requirements to get the free status. One is that the vaccination has been prohibited. Another one, the second one, is that no case has been confirmed in at least 18 months. And finally, that at least 99.8% of the establishments representing at least 99.9% of the bovine population are free. And we can see then here the kind of change and the mixture between input and output-based surveillance. And we can see that even more in the maintenance of the status requirements when you have to carry out an annual surveillance and you have a level of confidence target of 95% and also target prevalence rates both for establishments at 0.2% and also for the bovine population of 0.1%. So what's happening in Ireland? In Ireland, we have a program that is compulsory since 2013, and we've been tissue tag testing all newborn calves. And at the moment, well, we do have a 99.6% of animals with negative status, 97.7% of herds with negative herd status, and an animal level prevalence of 0.01%. So the implementation group, BVD implementation group, which is a kind of a multi-agency group that leads the BVD policy in Ireland, agreed to pursue the alignment with the animal health. And one caveat really is that, for example, we still have quite a lot of vaccination in Ireland. Is that it's been not part of the program, but it's something that farmers have been able to do. However, what we can see in this graph is that it's been reducing around 10% every year. And what we decided as a set of enhancements and measures is that in any herd that had a case, a suspect case, would have a vaccination carried out. And this vaccination, at least we can record it in our program database. So a series of measures happens when there is a suspicion of a case in Ireland. The first of all is that the herd is immediately restricted for sales and purchases, and the status is suspended. And then there are a set of measures that have to be completed before these restrictions may be lifted. And they include, well, first of all, that any positive or inconclusive animal must be removed for at least 3 weeks. And then a whole herd testing is carried out for antigenal virus. There is an epidemiological investigation that must be completed, and also a vaccination of females over 12 months. And these second, third, and fourth points must be done by a trained vet. And the animal health law says that in herds with suspect cases must have the disease status suspended, an epidemiological inquiry conducted, and also the isolation of case and movements restricted. So you can see how this is fitting in there. And just a few more requirements for these herds, the neighbors are immediately notified, although they're not told exactly who, but they know that there is in the vicinity, so they can actually then protect their animals. There has to be a cleaning and disinfection program on farm, and then following the lifting of restrictions, they have to continue to access for a minimum of 24 months, continue vaccination program on a second year. This must be done before the next the breeding season, and not to sell any female that was in calf at the time of birth of the first suspect until this calf has been born and tested for BVD. So we're hoping to that our competent authority is going to that the application is going to be submitted for recognition of the BVD program. So moving on now to IBR. Again, this is the map from this paper, which is another output from the sound control. Now, the main difference that we can see here with BVD is that now we do have these officially free. So before this animal health, the new animal health came into place, there were also the opportunity to have an IBR free program recognized, an IBR freedom recognized. What we can see is that several countries already have achieved this. The Nordic countries and Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Czech Republic. And again, it seems to be that there are a lot of control programs around around Europe, and different approaches to those as well. So let's have a look and see what the annex says in terms of IBR, the requirements at establishment level. First of all, is that no case of IBR has been confirmed in the past 12 months, that animals have not been vaccinated against IBR for the past 2 years, that at least one serological testing regime is applied, and we'll go through that on the next slide. Also some introduced animal requirements. And finally, as in BVD, germinal products can only come from either IBR-free establishments or from an approved germinal product establishment. In terms of the testing, this gets a little bit more complex for IBR. We have the first option is that we take one blood, milk, or meat juice samples from all bovine animals over a period of not more than 12 months. And of course, those are negative. Second option is that we take two rounds of sampling with a minimum of 2 months and a maximum of 12 months between them. And these have to include all female animals over 12 months, all breeding males over 12 months, and if they're non-breeding males over 12 months, to take a random sample to detect 10% of seroprevalence with 95% confidence. Then we do have options for dairy herds that have at least 30% of where 30% of the cows are lactating, and then for these herds, 3 volatile milks can be taken no less than 3 months apart, and these have to be representative of all the lactating females and epi units. And then as well, there is a need to take 1 blood or meat use from the non-lactating females over 12 months and breeding males over 12 months, plus the random sample from the non-breeding animals over 12 months as before. And then we have another option for pure dairy herds, so herds that have at least 95% of the cows lactating and less than 5% males. So then they have to take at least 5 volatile milks within the year, with at intervals of not less than 2 months, and then they have to represent all lactating females and all epi units. And now this is quite complex, but there is an added complexity here, and is the requirements for diagnostic tests. So this is exactly what comes up in the regulation. So what we can see is that we have, for non-vaccinated animals, we have either the whole virus in indirect ELISA or GB ELISA. And for DIVA vaccinated animals, we have the GE ELISA. But we have the matrices that these tests can be applied to, and then other requirements. So I'm going to show you our interpretation of the diagnostic tests that can be applied and where they can be applied. So what we have here is the matrices, the 3 types of tests, and whether they can be used for freedom or maintenance. And what we can see is that if we use individual sera, these 3 tests are okay for both freedom or maintenance. Pooled sera, though, is only applicable for the whole virus ELISA and GB ELISA. It's open to interpretation whether it's allowed with the G ELISA, but all of them would require validation. But quite importantly then, for individual milk and pool milk, the only test that we can use for obtain freedom is whole virus ELISA. This means that if any herd is doing vaccination with the DIVA vaccine, then there's just you can't reach freedom with the GE ELISA. However, you can use it for maintenance in individual milk and pooled milk as long as it's validated. And then, well, meat juice can be used with the GB or the GE ELISA. In terms of introduction of animals, well, again, if they're coming from an IBR-free establishment in a free zone, then they can come in straight away. If it's an IBR-free establishment in a non-free or non-approved program zone, they either have to be tested negative for whole virus antibodies or negative for GE antibodies after introduction and before granting of status. So once the herd is IBR-free, these animals cannot come in, and then they can be added. And if the herd is not free, the animals have to be subjected to quarantine prior to introduction and then tested negative for whole virus antibodies at least 21 days after the start of the quarantine, and then they can come in. In terms of the maintenance test, then it's just slightly simpler. Now we have only 3 options. So the testing requirements now are a bit reduced. So just with 1 blood, milk, or meat juice from all animals over 24 months. If it's all negative, then it's okay, it's valid to continue on. In terms of these dairies that have at least 30% of the females lactating, they have to have at least 3 bulk tank milks at intervals of not less than 3 months, but then also a blood from all the breeding over the breeding males over 24 months old. Again, this bulk tank milk can only with the provisos of that we've gone through in the diagnostic tests. In terms of these pure dairy herds, where there's only less than 5% males, then at least 6 bulk tank milks with intervals of not less than 2 months. And they have to represent all the females and all the units. And if these herds have free status for 3 consecutive years, then we can just go to an annual blood or milk samples for the number of animals that would allow the detection of at least 10% seroprevalence with 95% confidence. In terms of the member state, well, there are 2 main requirements. One is that vaccination has been prohibited. And then, well, this looks a little bit like BVD as well, but it's at least 99.8% of establishments that representing at least 99.9% of the bovine population are free from IBR. Again, for maintenance of status, is there is a requirement to do annual surveillance on random sampling that will give us with that 95% level of confidence and a target prevalence of 0.2% of establishments and 0.1% of the bovine population. So what has been happening in Ireland and how are we approaching it? Well, over the last period of time, we have actually been designing a proposal, a national proposal, to put forward to the industry and government, and this work has been underpinned by a mathematical model as well. We were working from a prevalence from a couple of 2009 studies where we had between 75 and 80% of the herds being positive in bulk milk. We do have recent twice-a-year bulk milk surveillance done with IBR GE, and we're hoping to analyze those results very soon. But another important aspect to be aware for the Irish situation is that we've had, for example, in 2020, there were over 3 million doses of IBR vaccines sold in Ireland. So vaccination is applied extensively, and we don't know exactly in which herd types, but we are aware that typically dairy herds tend to do more, at least a whole herd vaccinations. But we know that the vaccination has been increasing year on year over the last few years. So the program proposal, really what we're proposing is to start with a reduction of prevalence, because with the level of vaccination that there is in Ireland, with the level of prevalence, thinking about what the animal health law says in terms of the duration of a program of 6 years, we believe we have to start initially with a reduction of prevalence, then move to an eradication phase where we will seek a full alignment with the animal health law, and then approval by the EU, and hopefully at some point then moving to a post-eradication surveillance phase where we would stop the vaccination. And the key things from the program is that the dairy herds would start with a bulk milk antibody ELISA, that it could be the GE ELISA. We know that typically there is a need to have between 10 and 15% of animals positive for a bulk milk antibody ELISA to be positive, but we're not using it to get the herd free. What we're using is to give an indication of the seroprevalence within the herd, and therefore we know if it's negative, then we can recommend for this herd to move into individual screen and to pursue freedom. However, if it's positive, then we can recommend the herd to vaccinate and to continue to monitor the status. And we know that this type of program has been successful in other countries as well. For the beef herd, what we would suggest is to sample a proportion of the herd, again to determine the prevalence. So we're taking the snapshot, a concept from our Belgian colleagues, so testing 30 randomly selected animals from the herd. Again, what it gives us is an indication of the seroprevalence. And we know that if it's negative, it's very likely that the seroprevalence is not only under 15%, but probably close to zero. So if they have a negative snapshot, then they can move to individual screen and to pursue freedom. But if it's positive, we know it will be probably medium to high prevalence, so these herds will be recommended to vaccinate and to monitor the status. And I'm going to show you a little bit of the modeling that we've done, well, Jonas Brock has done. It did start with looking initially at a new herd classification, so combining expert knowledge and machine learning with an algorithm called self-organizing maps. So what it showed us is that, well, we were typically classifying our herds between beef, dairy, and mixed, but actually that there are a lot of subtypes, and these are these are giving us a much better understanding of the types of animals within each herd, of the movements, of interaction between herds. And this is really very important to the epidemiology of a disease and to design a good program to control and eradicate disease. So also through this work, we realized that actually County Kerry, which is the southern west side, the county of Ireland, is quite representative. So it's got the same of the whole of Ireland. It's got the same proportion of different herd types as the whole of Ireland. It's got around 5,000 herds and 360,000 animals. So the decision was to first develop this model, which is individually based, and it's got aspects like a biology of the animal. So animals that they get pregnant, and they go through different pregnancies, etc. Introduces all the management of movements, and then the last kind of block to introduce is the epidemiology of IBR. And this is the nice thing, because then you can introduce epidemiology of other diseases and use it that way also. And of course, it's available to test options and what if questions. So, well, this is our proposed IBR program in a nutshell. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but what we have is different herd classifications to recognize herds that are still vaccinated, but they're working towards freedom. And this is something that is lacking in the animal health law, because it's focusing on stopping vaccination and moving on. And yeah, we're not at that point. And it can be applied to all our different herds. And then we can ask many questions. We can ask, well, is it going to work, which is important? When do we reach eradication? Do we need transport restrictions? When to introduce them? And also, are there any other options that could be considered? So I'm just going to show you these, a simulation of the prevalence Kerry, both with no program and with no movement restrictions. And with movement restrictions, we start at -1, and what we see is the proportion of seropositive herds. So the movement restrictions really are the introduction of animals requirements, and so so what we can see is exactly the impact. And what we can see is that, yeah, the movement restriction seems to be getting closer and faster, but actually without movement restrictions is getting also close enough. So let's see these represented differently. What we can see here is the proportion of seroprevalent herds, and how with no program we continue having a close to 80% prevalence. And then we see the eradication with movement restriction is getting to eradication earlier. That's an eradication program with no restrictions, but yeah, perhaps not as earlier as we would have expected. Anyway, we are really working through this process, and we're hoping that we're going to have a full the program and options presented to our IBR implementation group this year, and hopefully we'll have a decision then whether to proceed with a full national IBR program or not. So just a few conclusions. Yes, we do have a new animal health law with a new disease classification, which is key, and that includes diseases that have not been previously legislated for. It focuses now on preventive approach, on biosecurity, on surveillance, and what we can see is when we go through the actual requirements, that is quite a mixture, at least for these category C diseases, between input and output-based surveillance. So you have some prescriptive requirements, and then it gets to a point that is more based on output phase. And we, our aim in Ireland is to apply for EU recognition of the BVD program. And yes, which we're hoping to have an IBR program, but we can see that we're going to need a prevalence reduction phase before getting into fully with the animal health law requirements. So just to thank you for your attention.